And as many of you know, we've been studying the book of joy, and I'm going to do a meditation straight out of it. In the back, they have a section of joy practices. And so I'm going to lead the Tonglen meditation, which is to help with suffering of others and adversity. So let's just begin by settling your mind, taking several breaths, just natural breaths, through your nose, and just relax with every breath. Just focusing on your breath naturally, in and out. Think of someone you know who is suffering. You can choose a loved one, a friend, or even a whole group of people, such as refugees. Reflect on the fact that just like you, they wish to overcome suffering and be joyful. Try to feel a sense of concern for the well-being of the person or group you are focusing on. Feel deep within your heart the desire for them to be free from suffering. Taking their suffering, as you inhale, imagine the pain being drawn from their body and dissolving when it enters the warmth and bright light of your compassionate heart. You can see their pain as dark clouds that are dissolving as they encounter the bright light of your heart. If the idea of taking in others' suffering is concerning or unsettling, you can imagine their suffering dissolving into a bright orb of light in front of you that is radiating out from your compassionate heart. Give out your joy. As you exhale, imagine that you are sending the person rays of light filled with your love and compassion, your courage and your confidence, your strength and your joy. And repeat this practice of taking in suffering and transforming and giving it your joy. So we see the people, whomever we have as our object of suffering. And on our inhale, we breathe in with compassion their suffering. And you may want to visualize it as a cloud of smoke, dense, thick smoke that you're taking in. And then when you exhale, you breathe out light and love as your compassionate heart has transformed their suffering into love. So now let us just take a few moments in the silence to continue this inhale and exhale practice, holding people in mind that we want to heal in some way. And with this practice, we are grateful for the opportunity to use our loving, compassionate heart to help others in this way heal in mind, spirit, and body. And for all these blessings, that we are giving and receiving as we practice our meditations. We are grateful. Thank you. Thank you, Pete. Yeah, Pete Calgaro. We have joy down in our hearts. So, well, it's great to see everybody here. Last week we had a big group for Halloween, and then I was wondering today with the great weather whether anyone was going to come or not, or it'd just be us working here and talking to each other, you know. But so I'm glad that you're all here. We won't keep you all day. Let you out into the sun and the fun and everything else. So Evan asked me to do this week, which is the last week of our book discussion, and it's the Book of Joy with Holiness Dalai Lama, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and the author and interviewer Douglas Abrams. So we've been doing this now 6 weeks. This is the 7th week and the last week of our groups. And so he said he knew I'd be able to connect it to unity. So I take things literally. So I will be doing that. So what I'm going to do is this week we're in the last section, and we're dealing with the 8 pillars of joy, they call it. In other words, kind of 8 principles of joy. And last week was perspective, humility, humor, and acceptance. And now this week it's forgiveness, gratitude, compassion, and generosity. So what I'm going to do is actually read kind of pieces of the book, just because I think it's really good, and then add a little commentary, and then move on to the next piece. Now, the first pillar is perspective, and that kind of sets the stage for everything else, is what is our perspective? And he says, a healthy perspective really is the foundation of joy and happiness, because the way we see the world, the way we see the world is the way we experience the world. Changing the way we see the world in turn changes the way we feel and the way we act, which changes the world itself. Or as Buddha says, with our mind, we create our own world. Okay? So perspective and what we're seeing is actually creating what is happening is a key thing. And one of the things of the many stories that are in here is many people that shifted their perspective in one way or another. So this week, forgiveness is a key theme, and that's oftentimes an opportunity for us to shift perspective on something, right? When we feel some way we've been harmed or mistreated or whatever it is, and we have some need for forgiveness, that oftentimes takes a mind shift in perspective. And a few quotes here, even though it may not seem this way, but I like this one. Indeed, no one is incapable of forgiving, and no one is unforgivable. So no one is incapable of forgiving, and no one is unforgivable. Keeping that, and part of what they talk about, wider perspective of that type of truth. Okay. And forgiveness, the Dalai Lama continued, does not mean we forget. You should remember the negative thing, but because there is a possibility to develop hatred, we mustn't allow ourselves to be led in that direction. We choose forgiveness. So when many things happen, right, we can choose to go down a path of anger, retribution, hate, whatever, or we can choose a different path. And no one's making us do that. That's us in our heads, in our minds. And so looking at these teachings helps us make that kind of choice. Because the reality is a lot of people don't even think about it, and they just do it, and they react based on all the things they've been taught and all the different behaviors they've been programmed with and so forth, and we just react instead of actually choosing to forgive or not. And that's a big part of it, is being able to make that choice. Forgiveness, the Archbishop added, is the only way to heal ourselves and to be free from the past. Without forgiveness, we remain tethered to the person who harmed us. We are bound to the chains of bitterness, tied together, trapped. Until we can forgive the person who has harmed us, that person will hold the keys to our happiness, and that person will be our jailer. When we forgive, we take back control of our own fate and our feelings. We become our own liberator. So that's one of the key things about forgiveness, that point is really interesting to me, because I've had this conversation with some other friends in the past, and when we forgive, it's more about us than it is the other person. Because what we're doing when we truly forgive is we're letting go of our resentment. We're letting go of our anger. We're letting go of our judgments about someone or something, okay? And that's all for healing us. It's not like I'm sucking that out of another person, like in the tongue, or cleansing someone else for those things. It's me, it's us that are doing that. Now, it does have an impact on a relationship, of course, if I come at it from, and I'm really able to let go of the resentment and the anger and really forgive, that's going to make a difference in the relationship. But it's not like I'm making them different in some way, okay? They're going to respond differently to us because I've done that and I've cleansed my heart. Okay. And another key point here that says, so it is totally wrong, he said, emphatically cutting his hand sharply through the air, to say that tolerance and practice of forgiveness are signs of weakness. Totally wrong, 100% wrong. 1,000% wrong. Forgiveness is a sign of strength, isn't it? The Dalai Lama turned to the Archbishop and he said, absolutely yes. So, again, forgiveness doesn't mean just complacency. It doesn't, and it isn't a sign of weakness. It's in fact a sign of strength. It's a lot weaker. I think it's weaker for people just to react and be angry and just, go off. What strength does that take? I mean, anyone can do that, and people do it all the time, and it's like, okay, but it takes real strength to really forgive, and that's what changes us, and it's what changes the world when we can do that. So that, to me, the people who are, and there's some great stories in here about forgiveness. I'm not going to get into all of them, but someone who was in prison wrongfully for many years, and mother whose son was killed, and this and that, and all these things are in here that are great stories of regular people with awesome forgiveness that actually made huge difference in their lives and the lives of people around them. So, I mean, the Dalai Lama has been displaced since 1959 from his home in Tibet, so he's dealt with stuff. And the Archbishop with apartheid and all these things. They've seen a lot and been right there through a lot of things. So they're not just Pollyannish teachers that are just making these things up. So forgiveness is a strength. Okay. The next pillar in this section is gratitude, which I'll just cover briefly. It starts with this sentence which kind of shook my brain, which is, every day think as you wake up, I am fortunate to be alive. I have a precious human life. I am not going to waste it. So I'm fortunate to be alive. I have a precious human life. I'm not going to waste it. So in Buddhism, you can become human or non-human and so on and so forth, and I don't understand all the levels and how that all works, but basically based on karma and the life you live and have been living, then you express. And in this case, we're all here as humans, and we have a great opportunity, and we don't want to waste it. So that is something to be grateful for, and to be grateful through action by not wasting it, by doing good, by forgiving, and doing some of the other things that we talk about. And the next point is compassion, something we want to become. And this again starts with too much self-centered thinking is the source of suffering. A compassionate concern for others' well-being is the source of happiness. Right? So one of the things I do, and I think all of us do to some degree, and some of us more than others, is, we get into all of our own stuff, right? And we get into, and we all have stuff. I mean, we all have suffering. No one's excluded from suffering. It's just how we deal with it. Okay? So having a concern for others and doing things for others instead of just being caught up in our own monkey mind and our own spinning circles in our heads about our stuff going on really can lead to happiness because we feel better. We can see making an impact. We can see how other people respond and making a difference, and it just gets us out of our own heads worrying about our own problems and really helps other people. And that's what compassion is about. And he says, all the traditions carry the same message, the message of love. So the purpose of these different traditions is to provide and strengthen the value of our love, compassion. So different medicine, but same aim, to cure our pain, our illness. And as we mentioned, even scientists now say basic human nature is compassionate. So there's kind of been some debate about in our minds, are we really compassionate at the core? Or something else, fight or flight type of thing, But really, if we really get to the root of our mind, we are compassionate beings. And then it also goes on to distinguish empathy and compassion. One of the differences between empathy and compassion is that while empathy is simply experience another's emotion, so that's really getting into it, really feeling what someone else is feeling and, maybe feeling sad for them and so forth. Compassion is a more empowered state where we want what is best for the other person. As the Dalai Lama has described it, if we see a person who is being crushed by a rock, the goal is not to get under the rock and feel the way they are feeling. It is to help remove the rock. Okay, so that's a great analogy. So we don't want to just go under the rock and have the same suffering. What we want to do is help, and that's the compassion. It's empathy with action equals compassion. And the action can be something like we did with the Tonglen meditation. It doesn't have to be always physical action, but it could be spiritual action like that, where we're working to help someone else's suffering through our consciousness and connection through meditation. We are most joyful when we focus on others, not on ourselves. In short, bringing joy to others is the fastest way to experience joy ourselves. And another key point that they make throughout this whole text is that, we're all in this human community together, right? So let's understand that we're not different from other people, and other people aren't different from us, and there isn't some hierarchy. We're all humans. In fact, one earlier chapter, it was kind of funny, they were talking about speaking in public, and how both of them used to get nervous about that. And then they had the realization that, I'm just talking to other human beings that are just like me. So it's no big deal. Now, there might be thousands of them in their case or something, but that really helped them be less nervous about public speaking because they just accepted people as mutual, equal human beings. And then the 8th pillar is generosity. And he says, I think we're almost all surprised how our joy is enhanced when we make someone else happy. And they talk about the analogy of the Dead Sea. And some of you may have heard that before, but the Dead Sea in the Middle East is a body of water that has inflowing water. So it has some streams that flow into it, but it doesn't have any outlet. So there's no flow from the sea. It just goes in and then it stagnates. And stuff dies because that doesn't sustain natural life of plants or fish or animals or anything. It has to flow. All right? So we don't want to be the Dead Sea blocking the flow. We want to be enhancing the flow in our lives and in other lives. And that is really what generosity is about. And he says, in fact, taking care of others, helping others, ultimately is the way to discover your own joy and have a happy life. So generosity by sharing the gifts we have is a key principle in the book and in all traditions. And one of the things I want to say is the things they're talking about, you have a Buddhist leader and a Christian leader, and they're agreeing on the spiritual principles, okay? They're not looking at it like, I'm Christian and you're Buddhist and this and that, and they even talk about that. If we start looking at things that way, it's not going to work. Okay? We got to look at what brings us together and what we have in common in spirit and in life, and that's what unity attempts to do. Unity, bring it together, not separate, not make it different, not make someone else wrong and I'm right, but unity. So my last piece I want to do here is go back to traditional unity history. And the start of the unity movement was with our co-founders, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore. But specifically Myrtle Fillmore really walked through many of these principles to start a practice that became unity. So in 1886, okay, so 1886, Charles and Myrtle went to a lecture because back in 1880s, they didn't have YouTube and social media and television or radio or any of that. So how did you learn things and discover new things? Well, there were lectures, and they were very interested spiritual seekers. So they went to this lecture, and there's a quote by this Dr. Weeks that just, the light went off for Myrtle. And his quote was, I am a child of God, and therefore I do not inherit sickness. So I'm a child of God, and therefore I do not inherit sickness. I mean, how could God inherit sickness? It just doesn't make sense. So that just struck her in a way, because she was diagnosed with tuberculosis at that time, which was a death sentence. And her family had taught her that from childhood that she was an invalid and that she was sick and always going to be sickly. And that's where her mind was at until this quote landed and really made a difference. That's the shift in perspective, right? Which was talked about as a first pillar of joy. So shifting perspective. And she says the old belief that she was an invalid and had been born to an invalid was as waters that have passed away. So she let that go, changed her perspective. And then she came to the realization that she felt that everything in nature, in the world, and in our bodies is driven by some intelligence. It's not just haphazard. And so she says, life is simply a form of energy and has to be guided and directed in our body by our intelligence. How do we communicate intelligence? By thinking and talking, of course. Then it flashed upon me that I might talk to the life in every part of my body and have it do just what I wanted. I began to teach my body and got marvelous results. So she actually, in prayer and meditation, and had this shift and started talking nicely to her body. Okay? She says, I went to all the life centers in my body and spoke words of truth to them, words of strength and power. I asked for their forgiveness for the foolish, ignorant course that I had pursued in the past, when I had condemned them and called them weak, inefficient, and diseased. So she's talking about her own body and her attitude that she had towards her own body. And she goes, I realized I've been messing this up myself, and I'm going to shift it. And she did. And so she asked for forgiveness in her body and her different organs and so forth. And she asked forgiveness from God for using his life energy unwisely. And she had great results. Now, it didn't happen overnight. It took her about 2 years, but she became fully healed. And they didn't have medicine for this stuff back then. So it was kind of like, God bless you, you're on your own, and we think you're going to die, and you're going to be sick. And that was pretty much it. Well, she was totally healed with all of her stuff within 2 years. And what she did then is she immediately began experimenting and teaching these practices to other people. Just in her household, her kids, they had a part-time housekeeper, launderer person that was having a problem, and she worked with her and got results. And she started sharing and sharing. And she said, I want everybody to know about this beautiful true law and how to use it. It is not a new discovery, but when you use it and you get the fruits of health and harmony, it will seem new to you. And you will feel that it is your own discovery. So she had compassion too. She wanted to share that. And that's essentially how Unity started, through her sharing these messages and working with people. And Fillmore's also had a very generous spirit, because then in 1890, they started Silent Unity, which is a long time ago. and then in Silent Unity is a prayer service that's 24/7 and has been for 120 years. And it started off the first 20 years basically being people writing or talking to them. And then in 1907, when the phone lines actually came in, that's when they created the phone line. But for all this time, it's been free service. It's supported by tithes, donations, and things. But it was something they wanted to do. That is generosity and compassion combined. She wanted to share this great learning and did that. And Silent Unity was created. Charles Fillmore was kind of the head part, brain part, and Myrtle is kind of the heart of the movement. Okay, so we had our brain and our heart working on this with Charles and Myrtle. And ultimately, then they didn't have a vision of churches or anything at all. Unity isn't a denomination. It's a spiritual education movement and a spiritual development movement. And the first thing, you see LUT up there by my name, Licensed Unity Teacher. The first people they trained were teachers. They didn't teach ministers. They didn't have a vision for ministries. They wanted teachers teaching the truth principles and bringing them out there. So the whole church thing and ministers came later, basically because people wanted it. People all across the country and other places wanted a ministry, wanted a community to bring it all in and do that. And so that's where we're at. So I wanted to use that to connect it to Unity, but also to make the point that they're the same principles that the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu are talking about. It's the same exact things that she and Charles applied back 1890s and on to help us create what we have here today and be here today. So my belief is that if you're dealing with true spiritual principles, it cuts across all traditions, right? It's not exclusive to anything. You can find these lessons in Christianity, in Buddhism, in Muslim, Islam, everything. If it's a true spiritual principle, it's gonna be in and across all traditions, and it's all good. So with that, I say, let's find our joy by helping others find their joy. Take it out in the world. Don't waste your human life. Do something with it and share it with other people. And that's what it's about. Thank you.